In 1899, a group of Canadian manufacturers pooled $1 million for a single purpose: to stop an American monopoly from swallowing their industry whole. The company they built, CCM, would go on to put bicycles under Christmas trees, skates on NHL ice, and its name into the childhood of an entire nation. 70% of professional hockey players wore its blades. Then, decision by decision, owner by owner, CCM was handed to the very foreign interests it was created to resist. But to understand that betrayal, you have to start with the threat that brought it to life. By the late 1980s, Canada's city streets echoed with the sound of spinning wheels. The bicycle boom swept the continent, turning a handful of local workshops into bustling factories. In Toronto's Junction, H.A. Lozier's plant poured out frames with a precision that rivaled anything south of the border. Steel tubes measured to tolerances of 0.002 of an inch, every rim nickel-plated and inspected by hand. In Brantford, Gould's 3-story factory sent out 100 bicycles a day, their Redbird model winning races and local pride. Welland Vale, once a maker of fine metal tools, shifted its forges to meet the new demand, while Gendron, led by the inventive Pierre Gendron, bridged the border with a Canadian-made men's bicycle that boasted the best components available. But as Canadian factories grew, so did the shadow from the south. In May 1989, the American Bicycle Company, a trust of 42 U.S. makers, pooled its power and capital, aiming to control the entire North American market. Their next move, a branch plant in Canada. Newspapers called it an invasion. The message was clear: without unity, Canadian builders would be swept aside. Into this storm stepped Walter Massey, heir to the Massey-Harris agricultural empire. He saw more than a business threat. For Massey, this was a test of national will. He called together the heads of Lozier, Gould, Welland Vale, and Gendronson, offering not just capital, $250,000 from Massey-Harris, but a vision. A single Canadian company strong enough to resist foreign control. Negotiations were tense. Each partner brought plant assets and inventory, valued between $75,000 and $150,000, to the table. Massey's offer came with a condition: control. The new board would have 3 Massey-Harris seats, one for each of the other firms. On May 12, 1989, the same day the American Bicycle Company filed its own charter, the Articles of Incorporation for Canada Cycle and Motorcomb were submitted in Ontario. $1 million in paid-in capital spread evenly among the 5 partners. The merger aim was simple: pool resources, eliminate duplication, and secure a monopoly on Canadian bicycle parts. Lozier's seamless steel tube technology would stay north of the border. Canadian jobs, Canadian ingenuity, Canadian ownership. Not everyone cheered. Small investors and rival shop owners, wary of what they called the Big Syndicate, accused the new board of monopolistic ambition. To calm the backlash, the directors created a dual-share structure, giving minority investors a voice, if not a vote. Quarterly production and financial statements were promised, transparency as a shield against suspicion. CCM's birth was more than a business deal. It was a declaration. Against the threat of American domination, a handful of Canadian manufacturers joined forces, not just to survive, but to build something that belonged to the country itself. The merger covenant was sealed not only in capital, but in the belief that Canadian industry could stand its ground and write its own story. Tommy Russell stepped into the factory with a plan that would change the company's fate and, in time, Canada's. 5 plants, scattered and struggling, were stitched together under his direction. In 1903, Russell secured a $150,000 lease on the Junction plant, setting up a new kind of assembly line. Bicycles for the city, motor bicycle prototypes for the daring, and a vision that reached beyond 2 wheels. The gamble was bold. Imported motor cars were flooding the streets, threatening to make CCM's mainstay obsolete. Russell's answer was the Model A, a 2-seater automobile powered by a 10-horsepower engine, built from the same steel that shaped the company's bicycles. Only 23 cars rolled off the line that first year, each one a statement. Canadian steel, Canadian hands. The Model A wasn't cheap, but it was a machine that said Canada could build its own future, not just buy it from abroad. Yet, the real breakthrough came by accident. In the winter of 1904, a broken wooden hockey blade sent a CCM engineer rummaging through the scrap bins. He found a steel bicycle rim, hammered it flat, and fixed it to a skate. The result was a revelation, lighter, stronger, and far more durable than anything on the ice before. The company wasted no time. Patent C, A72451905 was filed, and within months, 5,000 pairs of steel blades were rolling out of the plant, destined for rinks from Winnipeg to Montreal. Russell's ingenuity did more than save jobs. It gave CCM a second act, transforming a bicycle company into a winter sport powerhouse. The accidental skate blade would go on to define childhoods and create heroes, while the lessons of plant consolidation and rapid adaptation set a blueprint for wartime flexibility still years away. For now, CCM was no longer just a bulwark against foreign takeover. It was a proving ground for Canadian invention, where a crisis could spark a revolution, and a piece of scrap metal could become a symbol of national pride. The war years pressed the Junction plant into a new kind of service. In 1915, the Ministry of Munitions delivered a contract with instructions as stark as the times: produce thousands of black-painted bicycles for the front. No chrome, no ornament, just a foil-stamped badge, Canada Cycle, and Motor Company. The number is precise: 7,842 military bicycles shipped overseas between 1915 and 1918. Each one built by hands that might otherwise have been idle. Workers in Toronto and Brantford labored through blackout nights, their shifts dictated by the arrival of steel and the urgency of telegrams from Ottawa. Every finished bike was tested, stamped, and loaded for Europe, where Canadian messengers would ride them into the mud and wire of the Western Front. Spare parts for field wagons followed, along with repair kits and crates of replacement wheels. Civilian bicycle sales halted for 2 years, but the company's output became a lifeline. Proof that Canadian factories could turn peacetime skill into wartime supply. The war contracts did more than fill order books. They forged a reputation. When the fighting ended, families remembered CCM not just as a name on a badge, but as a company that had answered the call. That memory lingered long after the armistice, shaping how Canadians saw the brand in years to come. In the peace that followed, CCM turned its attention back to the home front. The 1920s and 30s brought a different kind of campaign, one aimed not at armies, but at children and parents. School notebook programs appeared in classrooms across the country. A child who received a CCM notebook might also be promised a grade guarantee bicycle, a machine that would last as long as their report cards stayed strong. Newspaper ads in 1932 painted bright scenes: boys and girls in pressed uniforms, hands gripping the handlebars of a CCM Junior, faces lit by the promise of freedom on 2 wheels. The message was clear. This was the bike that grew with your child, a companion from first ride to graduation. By the late 1950s, CCM's reach was nearly universal. Production peaked in 1958, with 210,000 units rolling out of the Toronto plant, the workforce swelling to 2,400. The company's advertising filled comic strips and school books, linking the bicycle to family values and the rhythms of Canadian childhood. For many, the first taste of independence came with a CCM badge gleaming on the frame. That foil emblem, once stamped on war bikes, now marked a rite of passage, a signal that you belonged, that you were trusted to roam a little further from home. In every corner of the country, CCM became more than a product. It was a memory in motion, the hum of tires on gravel, the weight of a lunchbox dangling from the handlebars, the thrill of a new school year, and the promise of a summer ride. The same company that had built for war was now woven into the fabric of ordinary lives. Its story carried forward by generations who never forgot what those three letters meant. The Tacks skate was more than a product. It was a promise. In 1937, CCM acquired George Tackaberry's revolutionary hockey boot patent, a design born from a Winnipeg cobbler's effort to shield a star player's injured foot. The result was a boot built for punishment. Tough leather, reinforced toe, stitched for seasons of hard play. By 1939, the NHL official guide listed Tacks as the skate of choice for the Montreal Canadiens and Toronto Maple Leafs. CCM's blades flashed beneath the feet of the country's greatest heroes, from Rocket Richard to Dave Keon. On Saturday nights, when radios crackled with play-by-play and the nation leaned in, it was CCM that carried the dreams of every backyard rink across the country. The numbers told the same story. By the 1950s, CCM supplied more than 70% of the skates worn in the NHL. The Tacks line became a rite of passage. Parents saved for months. Children begged for them at Christmas. And every pair arrived with the weight of Canadian pride stitched into the tongue. The company's catalogs boasted of Canadian-made quality, and the foil badge on each skate was as much a symbol as a guarantee. For decades, the Tacks skate was the standard by which all others were measured. But inside the boardroom, a different game was unfolding. Sam Massey, grandson of the founder, spoke often of a covenant, a duty to protect what his family had built for the country. Board minutes from the late 1950s record his warnings that CCM was not just another business, but a trust held on behalf of Canadian families. He argued that the company's strength was its connection to the people who rode its bikes and laced up its skates, not just its balance sheet. Massey's words echoed in annual reports and public speeches, but the mood around the board table was shifting. By the late 1960s, the golden age was showing cracks. Labor costs were rising, and the market for bicycles was flattening. The board, now packed with outside investors and accountants, began to question the old ways. On a spring day in 1969, the directors gathered for a vote that would change everything. The sale to Levy Industries, a Toronto conglomerate with no roots in sport or childhood, passed by a narrow margin. The minutes are blunt. The company, its patents, and its plants would be absorbed into a larger industrial portfolio. The Tacks skate, once a symbol of Canadian ingenuity, became just another asset, valuable but expendable. The Massey Covenant, once spoken with conviction, was now just a line in the minutes. As the ink dried on the sale agreement, a sense of unease settled over the Junction plant. Workers whispered about the new owners, and old-timers wondered what would become of the badge that had meant so much for so long. The Tacks era, CCM's pinnacle, ended not with a celebration, but with a boardroom bargain. The seeds of decline had been planted, and the company that once stood as a shield against foreign takeover was now vulnerable from within. The next chapter would not be written by those who built it, but by those who saw it as a line item on a ledger. Levy Industries walked into the junction plant with a promise of efficiency and left with a trail of resentment. The new owners slashed costs, cut corners, and stripped away the last layer of pride from the shop floor. By 1970, the Internal Quality Review painted a bleak picture. Defect rates on bicycle frames had more than quadrupled in 5 years. The heat treatment ovens ran cold, line supervisors came and went, and the foil badge that once stood for Canadian excellence began to lose its shine. On the floor, the anger was palpable. CUPE. Local 1052's leaders, men and women who had spent decades at CCM, watched as their warnings were ignored. Safety complaints piled up. Wages stagnated while inflation chewed away at every paycheck. In June 1972, the union called a strike. For 71 days, the plant gates stayed locked. Assembly lines, once the heartbeat of Canadian childhood, fell silent. The standoff drew headlines across Ontario, with accusations of unsafe welding practices and management's refusal to recognize collective bargaining rights. Workers picketed in the rain, holding signs that read, "Our work, our pride, our future." When the dust settled, the scars remained. Management's response was to double down on cost-cutting, gutting the R&D budget, and ignoring the rise of the 10-speed. By 1978, annual sales had plummeted to just 100,000 bikes. The union's fight had been for more than wages. It was a battle for the soul of CCM. But the new owners saw only numbers. The badge that once meant Canada now meant nothing at all to those holding the ledger. Receivership arrived with a thud in the winter of 1982. Court dockets listed $23 million in claims, more than the company could ever repay. The badge that once meant Canadian quality was now an entry on a bankruptcy ledger. In February 1983, CCM ceased to exist as a single company. The bicycle division, stripped of its factories and heritage, was sold off to ProCycle. They would keep the name, but not the soul. Frames shipped in from abroad, assembled for a market that barely noticed the change. The real prize, the hockey division and the Tacks line, went to Sport Masca of Quebec. For the first time, the fate of CCM's most cherished product would be decided outside the junction, and soon outside the country. Receivership Authority signed the asset transfer, dividing what was once a Canadian institution into pieces for auction. Within a year, Sport Masca began rebranding for Europe, setting up the next handoff. In 1992, SLM International, a Swedish-owned group, took control. Each transaction moved the brand further from its roots. The badge became a passport, traveling from courtrooms to boardrooms, from Toronto to Montreal, then to Stockholm and beyond. With every sale, the connection to Canadian hands and Canadian ice grew fainter. CCM, born as a bulwark against foreign takeover, was now a commodity passed between foreign owners. What was once a symbol of national pride had been reduced to a trademark, traded and leveraged until nothing of its original promise remained. In 2021, Canadian Tire reported selling around 45,000 CCM-branded bicycles. Not a single one was made in Canada. The numbers are unambiguous. Every frame, every part, Every badge shipped in from overseas, assembled just enough to pass as familiar, then rolled out onto Canadian sales floors. The old Weston plant stands empty. There is no factory, no union shift, no hum of steel being shaped by local hands. In 2023, Altor, a Swedish private equity firm, took control of CCM's hockey line. The company's decisions are made in Stockholm boardrooms, not in the towns where generations once built their livelihoods around the brand. Today, CCM exists only as a trademark, licensed again, and finally detached from any real place. The badge that once stood for Canadian skill and childhood dreams now arrives by container ship, stamped on products that could come from anywhere. What began as a shield against foreign takeover has become an import label, a memory sold back to the country that gave it meaning. There is nothing left to reclaim, just a name, traded and owned by strangers. Today, CCM is little more than a trademark traded on global balance sheets, a far cry from the symbol that once defined Canadian ingenuity and childhood. As foreign ownership becomes the norm, we risk turning national icons into mere commodities. The loss of CCM wasn't fate. It was a series of decisions. The question lingers: who decides what Canada keeps and what it's willing to lose? Share your thoughts below.